Welcome to another Early Years Learning Hub podcast. My name is Jackie Ward and I'm the founder and managing director of the Early Years Learning Hub. This episode is one of our Unpacking Theory and Research series where I invite academics, researchers and experts in their field to help our listeners engage with and put research into action. Today I'm joined by Lisa Regal, who is a PhD and part of Educational Partnerships Institute and the author of NeuroWell, which I love that expression, NeuroWell. And it's a book all about applying brain science to build safe, supportive and proactive schools. And we'll be discussing brain science and how we can use it to support children to self-regulate and develop social skills. Lisa, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional journey?
Sure. So thank you, first of all, for having me. I was a teacher for 9 years, and then I was an administrator for a couple of years. Then I had the opportunity to do my doctoral work at Ohio State, and I actually studied leadership, but I was more interested in the human system instead of the policy end of things. And so I really got interested in kind of engagement and motivation and how do we help people become happier and healthier and more fulfilled. So that kind of led me on a journey to really think about brain science. And I started working in schools, and I've done quite a bit of work in elementary schools as well, thinking about how do we actually teach people about their brain and help them use that to be more self-aware, more self-regulating, and to feel a sense of self-control. So that's what I've been doing for about the past 15 years. And then NeuroWell, the book, came out in May of last year, and it was really kind of the culmination of some of that work that I've done and some suggestions and practical strategies for educators.
I think it's such an important topic at the moment, isn't it? Because I think we hear from teachers and educators a lot in Australia, especially about lots of challenging behaviours, and we've got lots more children with additional needs, and so lots more need for us to be, as teachers and educators, aware of and able to best support children. So that, because if they're not regulating and they're not managing, if they're in crisis all the time, they can't very well learn. So I think it's such an important topic. So I'm interested, we talked when we were preparing the podcast about understanding the biology of the brain in relation to children's behaviour and responses. So can you tell us a little bit about how understanding how the brain works can help us understand how children process and respond to information, which I think is, for me, a real key to understanding it and then working with children?
Sure. So basically, biology and context shape behavior. So any behavior, academic, social behavior, your behavior, my behavior, kids' behaviors, it's this intersection between our biology and our context. So when we understand our biology, then we reframe problems that we see in the classroom or in our homes, and then we have ultimate control over the context. We also live in a global context, and so there's a lot of contextual factors that actually change the biology of our brain and the way that we perceive things. And that's something that I've seen in children that are growing up today. They have some different contextual factors that are really impacting the way they view what's going on in the present. And that's leading to a lot of dysregulation and inability to sort of feel that sense of self-control.
Yeah, I think that's very true for every generation that's come before, isn't there? There's always a change in your childhood and how you grew up, but I feel like it's a really, really significant change now with the introduction of, digital technology that is so available, not just for the adults in the world, but also for children, isn't it? That's a huge shift compared to before.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things with technology that are really impacting the brain. And, I hear, like when I started teaching, I had never even heard of executive function, which first of all is a problem because we're not training teachers about the actual medium that they're trying to influence. Like we don't give them brain training so that they understand how the brain learns or how, we behave and how the brain impacts that. So I think that the executive function delays that we're seeing in kids are partly due to the context that they're growing up in. So for example, when you and I were kids, we had to memorize phone numbers. We had to memorize addresses. If we had a question, we had to go to the library, we had to look at a keyword, we had to navigate a spatially organized area, we had to pre-read, we had to pull main ideas out, we had to do all those things, and those are all building executive function in our brain. In today's world, kids don't do that. And so they're not building, they don't have, our brain learns through repetition, experience, and emotion. They're not getting that repetitive practice. So we see a lot of delays in working memory and problem solving and, prioritizing and those kinds of skills that kids used to come to school already kind of being developed or starting to be developed. So it becomes a real challenge for educators. And then the other contextual factor that I see is that we don't have the traditional family structure that we once had. Like I used to have family dinners and they're boring, right? You sit and you have to listen to your parents talk and, but what they taught me through that repetition, they taught me how to understand the rhythm of a conversation, how to read nonverbal, and it was all done in a safe unit. Your family unit was your safe unit. And so, kids aren't getting those experiences. If you go out to dinner, I know in the United States, I mean, you go out to dinner and everybody's on their device. Nobody's looking at each other, talking to each other. And so we're missing this opportunity to help our kids learn early experiences and skills around social engagement. And then we also have over parenting going on where kids don't have just unstructured time. And unstructured time builds creativity and conflict resolution and grit and a sense of confidence that I can manage the world on my own. And in today's world, everything is so scheduled and monitored that kids are always looking for an external force to fix the problems. And so what we see in schools now is they can't manage a productive struggle. They go right from being calm to completely alarmed when they don't get something right away. And so the way we're living and the technology in our world, it's wonderful as far as like I don't have to memorize things anymore, but there are some unintended consequences that educators need to pay attention to. And I don't see a lot of schools really being strategic in a scope and sequence of how you develop these critical thinking skills and executive function skills the same way that we're very, scope and sequence and strategic about teaching and assessing math or reading.
Yeah, that's so true. And I couldn't agree more with you, Lisa, when you talk about that idea that we're not, as pre-service teachers, we're not teaching people about understanding the brain and how it works. Yet that's such a key part of managing classrooms and helping children to be in a good place to learn, isn't it? So
Yeah. Well, and I'm a
yeah,
big proponent that we should start teaching kids about their brain in preschool. I mean, we should be teaching them how their mind works so that they have some metacognitive strategies so that they, have that self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-control. And it's interesting, I actually, my next book just came out a couple weeks ago. It's called Aspirations to Operations. And it's for leaders because we have the same problem with adults. We are not teaching leaders about the human system that they're managing. We teach them a lot of like practices, protocols, org theory, how to create policies, but we're not actually attending to the humans in the system. And I see a lot of people in the workforce, even, and teachers included, who are burned out, who are not managing stress well. And quite frankly, a dysregulated teacher does not have a regulated classroom. And so it's really important that we take care of the adults in the system so that they can model and take care of the kids in the system.
yeah, that's so true. And I've been a middle manager for a really long time until quite recently, and I would 100% agree that managing the people and the people's, emotions and responses to things and ability to manage their own workload and all those sorts of things would be 100% the most challenging aspects of leadership. I feel like the other things are easy peasy compared to that, strategic planning, organizing, getting all the work stuff done, but the people side of things, that's the trickiest part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
that's the part that's the hard part. But the good news is that we have the information we need about how the brain works, that if we just bring it to the people who are either managing people or teachers who are managing children, it can give them a whole new lens through which they will see their work. And then they can start to understand why some things work and why some things don't, and they can start to shine a light on the human side of education. I know in the United States we're very focused on test scores. And so what I've seen over the past 15 years or so is this shift in the way, just the mindset of like, I teach content. Like you hear teachers say, I teach English, or I teach biology, or I teach social studies. But you don't oftentimes hear people say, I teach high school, I teach kids. We need to move away from I teach content back to I teach kids. And I think that's becoming even more important because with AI, the future workforce is going to rely on that human factor, that gap between technology and what humans can do. And we right now are still training students to follow processes or algorithms and to be, receptacles of content, but technology does that way better than humans will ever do. I mean, you can go on AI and you can type in a query and it'll give you all kinds of information, but what we need is the human to read that and to reason and to have critical thinking skills, and we're just not doing that in schools. We're still doing this transmission of content. And then, once the internet came and content was available to everybody, we kind of shifted to now we're going to do career readiness and we're going to do pathways. But again, with AI, who knows what the pathways are going to be? And there's nobody who can really tell you what they're going to look like. So I think we've got a real purpose problem. And kind of one of the passions that I have is, can we make the purpose our people instead of the content? And you can still teach the content, but when you teach the content through the lens of I teach kids content versus I teach content to kids, it changes the way you approach your classroom environment, your climate, what you value, how you work with kids.
That is such, I feel a little bit mind blown here, Lisa, because you've just, I would so agree. In my interactions with AI, I'm thinking, oh yeah, this is never going to replace people. Replacing different parts of what we do, yes, but the people skills will always be important. And as you said, looking at the information that it generates and critically thinking as to whether or not that was useful information or not, those are the things that are going to be so important for the future. And those are the things that will not be able to be replicated. I think,
Right.
that's, yeah, amazing. I love that. But would you mind if we wound back a little bit because you talked in there, and I think you did kind of talk about it, but you said a lot of things at the one time. So, for someone who's never heard of what executive function is and working memory, can you unpack those concepts a little bit more for us?
Sure. So executive function, so when you think of your brain, I always think of our brain like a giant company. And a lot of people think of their brain as like it's one unit and it's who I am. But the reality is it's kind of like a giant corporation. So just like you might have like a fulfillment center and a customer service center and an HR center and a data center, our brain's kind of like that. And 80% of our brain is below our nose, and it is just keeping us alive. It's our limbic brain, and it is about looking for danger, dealing with stress, monitoring the body, and keeping us alive. The part that actually makes us human is the prefrontal cortex of our brain, and it's the part that developed late in our evolution, but it's what makes humans so superior to other animals is that we have these executive functions. So if you think of this prefrontal cortex as your executive C-suite office within this corporation of your brain, that's where the president of your brain lives. And so like any executive, it has executive functions. And so its job is to prioritize, to manage your time, to emotionally regulate, to have working memory. And working memory is basically the ability to pull up information in your brain and hold it there so that you can manipulate it. So if I have four thoughts, I pull them all up, but my working memory, it's kind of like the RAM on your computer. It can hold all those thoughts up there so that you can look at all of them separately and then make ways that you can process them and bring them together and synthesize. So the executive functions are really important. And what's kind of scary right now is that, just like the phone took away our need to use our working memory as much as we used to, the new AI stuff there, the researchers in AI are calling it cognitive offloading. So basically, we are sort of subleasing those tasks out to technology. But the problem is, If we continue to do that, then our executive functions don't develop. And then what makes us human? Because this is the part of your brain where your character and your morality and your decision making and logic and reason, that's where this happens. And if we continue to give that to an external force to do for us, it's a little scary about kind of what does that end up making us as a species look like.
Wow, and some great analogies there. I love that. The corporation and yeah, and the computer, the RAM. Interesting. And I see a lot of potential because I work in the early childhood space and we do tend to be more focused in on learning dispositions and, creative and critical thinking kind of skills because we're not so focused on content because content is embedded, but it happens naturally through, project investigations. But I'm definitely going to be thinking more in my practice now about how do I like be more overt in calling out those skills for children, like labeling them. I think that seems really important as well for them to understand what they're doing and how that thinking is so important. Because I think that's another thing we help children develop skills if we label them, don't we? They know that's a skill that they have then, like I can cut paper. Well, if we call it that, then we know that's what we can do.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
Yeah.
you definitely are blowing my mind, Lisa. I'm a little bit fangirling on some of what you're talking about. So I think we've talked a lot about lifestyle changes and the impact. So I'm interested now to talk about more about understanding body systems and how they integrate with the brain. So how important is the concrete connection between body and mind for young children? You talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's huge. And it's funny because I always say I think it's nuts like that you have to buy, at least in United States, you have to buy eye insurance and dental insurance separate from health insurance. It's like your eyes and teeth are literally in your head, but they treat them like they're not. And I think the same weird division happens between the mind, the brain, and the body. And the reality is the mind, the brain, and the body are all the same system. They're all connected. So you think you've got neurologists that take care of the structure of the brain, you've got psychologists or psychiatrists that are focused on the mind, and then you've got doctors that are looking at body systems, but they really are all connected. And so when you think about little ones, I think one of the things that's really important to know about our brain is how we form perceptions. So we can all be in the same space, having the same event, and experience it completely differently. And so the way I describe how our brain creates perceptions is it starts in that part of our brain below our nose, doesn't know time, can't tell a story. And so what it does, there's a structure in our brain that I call the data manager. I name him Harold in my brain. So he's the thalamus. And Harold is responsible for taking in all the information in the environment, and then he goes into our sensory memories. And children, until they're about 2.5, 3, they don't even make episodic memories. Every memory that's held in their brain is just a sensory association memory of like, these things make me feel good. So like when I smell my mom, my body relaxes. It's just sensory associations. So when the limbic system looks at all the information from the environment, it goes into those sensory associations. Again, below our nose, there's a lot of thinking going on down there that we are not privy to. So we don't know all the processes happening. So then if you think of it like a banana, like reality is a banana, and then we have all these filters in our sensory memories, these associations. They're almost like a spaghetti strainer or a colander. And so if you take that banana, which is reality, and you run it through these sensory associations to make sense of what you're feeling, touching, smelling, tasting, on the other side, the banana doesn't look the same. You've smushed it through the holes of the colander, right? So the banana is reality, the colander is your perception, or the filters, and then the banana on the other side is your perception. So like you and I, every single person on this planet has different filters that they line up. And so when we teach our kids about this and we say, hey, do you think that your banana is somebody else's banana? How would they see this situation? They start to realize that the way that their brain is putting sensory data together impacts how they see the world around them. And so when I teach kids about their brain and I talk about Harold, I call my security monitor Bob. and he's my amygdala, and he's the one that decides if he needs to hit the panic button and send me into a tantrum or send me into, stress, fight, flight, flee, whatever it is. And so when you teach the kids that, then you can say to them, if they're having a day where they're just out of sorts, you can be like, hey, what's up with Bob today? Bob seems really agitated. And the kids most of the time will go, yeah, Bob is super agitated. Okay, well, can I help you? Like, because the job of your CEO in your brain isn't to do the jobs of all the pieces of your brain, but it's to lead them so that every department in your brain is running optimally, efficient, productive, doing what it's supposed to do. So when you teach the kids about the parts of their brain, and I've even had them like draw the character they are and describe them. And then we talk about that. And then I'll say to them, hey, Bob seems really upset today. And they'll go, I know. And I'll be like, can I help you figure that out? So it changes the dynamic where there isn't shame involved in being out of control, because nobody likes to be out of control. But when we look at the behavior as this is a product of a kid making a very bad choice right now, we're missing the biology behind that behavior. What the kid is actually doing is the brain that kid is not even aware of, that doesn't have access to the thinking, that part of the brain is saying something in this context right now is leading to something I fear, and so I'm going to have a stress reaction. So I'll give you an example. I hate being late, and I know this. So like I'll give kids a whole bunch of like triggering types of things that make them sad. Like I'll say, what about when you feel like you're being left out? Does that make you sad, or does that make you like super like gonna explode or shut down? Or what about if somebody tells you did something wrong? Or what about if somebody gives you some feedback? Or what about if the classroom's super noisy? Or, just different kinds of triggers. And then we talk about like, what's the fear beneath that, right? So if somebody doesn't share their ball, it's not really about the ball in the moment. It's about the idea that you weren't included, right? And then, so for me, time. So when I was a kid, my parents were divorced. And so I spent a lot of time on the front stoop waiting for my dad because he was always late. So in my little 8-year-old brain, being late was associated with negative emotions. So my brain made an association between lateness and love or worth. It's a faulty association. People are late all the time. But my brain made that association when I was young, and it's a filter through which the banana passes, right? So when I get late, or if somebody's late, before I have a chance to think about it, my body starts to dysregulate and I get anxiety. And so now that I understand that, two things can happen. One is that if somebody else is running late, instead of it dysregulating me, making me anxious and annoyed, and then ruining my evening, I can send a message from my CEO down to that limbic brain to say, hey guys, this is not that. So Bob and Harold, cool your jets. We're fine. This has nothing to do with how they feel about me. And it relaxes my body back, because then they say, oh, okay, we don't have to make that association. Proactively, I'm able to say, okay, I know that if I'm running late, then I'm going to be anxious. And so I'm going to leave early. And so I always tell my clients, if I'm not there like 15 minutes early, I'm probably in a ditch somewhere, because I'm always going to be on time or early, because it's just better for my mental health, right? So if we teach kids about the things that get them upset, they're equipped then to resolve those conflicts in a different way than having every single new experience that upsets them feel like a novel experience that they haven't had to deal with before.
I love that. And what a unique way of sort of effectively teaching resilience, aren't you? Like it's okay, things are going to be okay, telling everyone that and calming everything down, those really teaching those self soothing kind of skills. And I love the idea that, associating it with, or disassociate and making it less personal, because I couldn't
Right.
agree more. When someone's upset and the whole, it's every time you try and intervene, it does sound like you're blaming that child for whatever's happening, doesn't it? You can't really get away from that if you don't, do what you've suggested, associating with, labeling different parts of the brain. I love that idea. What a great strategy. Definitely going to put that one into practice.
Yeah, and it changes the way that you address the situation in the moment. Instead of saying, what's wrong with you, or why are you doing this? you can say, "What's your brain telling you right now? You seem really upset. What is your brain telling you?" And then the kid can be like, "I don't know. It's telling me I should be angry." Well, why do you think it's telling you should be angry? Like, could we have your CEO of your brain tell your brain that you shouldn't be angry right now? And then they go, "Yeah, let's do it." And I'm like, "Okay, well, let's do it. Let's talk about, why you shouldn't be angry." And then we can process through. And it just separates out that guilt and shame that kids start to feel when they're out of control. Nobody likes to be out of control. And so it gives them some mechanisms to be able to find that control.
Well, and I can imagine it kind of dissolves all of those feelings and helps set that child up for success probably throughout the whole day, then, doesn't it? Because
Yeah.
they're already feeling better. Whereas if you don't handle it in that way, they're likely to have a multiple episodes throughout that day because it's likely that the cause could be something around being tired or being hungry or being, something bad happened at home that they're trying to process, all that kind of stuff. So I love it. It's very proactive strategy, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And that's what I talk about in NeuroWell is that a NeuroWell culture in a school is safe, so emotionally and intellectually safe. It's supportive, like power sharing and relationship driven, and it's proactive. So I always I'll always ask teachers, I'm like, "So do you think that the kids are going to roll around on the carpet and poke each other?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Then why are you angry when they do it?" Because you know it's happening. So like put things in place that give them a appropriate replacement behavior that, you know, attends to their need to move. They need to move, they need to socialize, they need to feel like they're part of a group. How do we put proactive things in place so that you know, feeds that need? So I always say, like with behavior, you got to feed the need. If a kid wants attention, you can't make them not want attention, but you can figure out how to provide attention to them in a way that's acceptable in a classroom setting. Or if they want power, you can provide power with them through choices or things within the classroom that are appropriate. Because if you don't, that need just continues to grow, and then they ask for it in the most inappropriate ways. Then you've got problems on your hand.
Yeah, no, I definitely I love all those tips. I feel like this is, as I said, so helpful. Which I think we've already said this, reframing behavior and responding in supportive ways. I think we've done that with using that information to create supportive environments. But so you talked a little bit about, allowing children opportunities to move. You've talked about giving them choices if power's the issue. Is there anything else that you would say in terms of creating supportive environments?
Sure. So I think one of the things is, first of all, teach them their brain so that they understand how it works and that they feel like they get to choose. Like they're the boss. You're the boss of your brain. If you don't like what your brain's telling you right now, you get to choose. The second thing is so that gives them some self awareness. In order to have that self regulation, they have to understand what discomfort feels like. And so I've done this activity with little ones where we have them, lay on the floor and draw their body on a butcher piece of paper, a big butcher block piece of paper. And then we talk about, so when, think about the last time you got in trouble or the last time you were really sad or you were really angry. What did your body feel like? And where did you feel it? And then they can color the different parts of their body. You can color code it, like whether it was, uncomfortable or whether it hurt. Because again, going back to that mind body, stress hurts, like it hurts your body. So getting them, because they may not have the emotional vocabulary to be able to say, well, I was feeling a little left out and that made me feel sad. They may not be able to process that, but they can tell you, I started to feel hot, or I started to feel shaky, or my throat felt tight, or my skin started to tingle. And it's funny when you ask the kids this, because somebody will say, well, I get really hot, and then other kids will be like, me too, and then they all, like, now they have something in common, right? So you have them kind of draw that on their body, and then you talk about, okay, what are things that you can do when you're feeling that way? And you can teach them how to breathe. You can teach them how to distract themselves. A couple little tips too is that water metabolizes stress chemicals, it metabolizes cortisol. So having them drink some water. The other thing you can do is have them look up. So the eye position actually stimulates different parts of our brain. So that's why if I ask you a question and you don't know, you go, and you look up. That's like knocking on the CEO door, like, hey, I got a question you need to attend to. If you get in trouble, you look down and that stimulates that limbic system. So like I've had some principals that'll put beanbag chairs and something interesting on the ceiling, like something hanging down there or pictures or something that are fun to look at. And when a student's getting upset, they give them a little bottle of water and they say, "Why don't you go sit in the calm chair for a minute?" And the kids will sit in the chair and they're looking up and they're drinking water, and within a couple minutes their whole body relaxes. And when their bodies relax, now you can have a conversation with the CEO. Because if the stress system hits the panic button, basically a message goes directly from the amygdala up to the CEO that says, "Hey, we're in trouble, so go grab a cup of coffee. We don't need you. Get out of here. We'll call you back to the office when it's time." Well, the problem is, again, executive functions happen in the executive's office, right? If they're not in their office, they're not doing their job, they're not practicing their job, they're not getting better at it. So it becomes kind of a hamster wheel where, like, I'm a dysregulated child who's always having outbursts or problems. That means that I'm not developing the executive function, and that executive function helps me not be the emotional child. So you end up in this sort of circle.
Yeah.
So we do that, and then we put up visuals of like things that they can try, and you can even have like a, like a little grid board with like 9 different options, and kids can try the different options to calm their body down. But getting them to understand what their body feels like when it's angry and what it feels like when it's calm. So I even tell teachers, put some music on and have the kids lie on the floor and just breathe and think of a fun story that goes with the music. Just let their minds wander and then have a conversation. How does your body feel right now? Do you feel super jelly and you're just relaxed? And so helping them to build that mind body connection so they understand what they feel like when they have certain emotions, and then they also understand some tools that can regulate their body.
That's amazing. I'm loving all of these tips, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to write those down when we finish so I can go and do them. We also talked about 7 conditions for change. So, if we're thinking about creating new or changing habits that children and adults may have fallen into in relation to behavior, because that's a common thing, isn't it? That, kind of repeat this, oh, I'm feeling this way. It kind of always ends up, as we said, in that spiral. What would you say those 7 conditions are, and what do we need to think about if we want to shift that behavior?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to realize is this is not just kids. Like this is how we all like, January's over, it's February 1st, and I'm guaranteeing you that 80% of the world has given up their New Year's resolutions. Not because they didn't want to do them, because they didn't have these conditions to change. So I always use an analogy to kind of explain this. So so let's say that you and I are like, okay, we need to eat healthier. We need to get healthier. We're going to lose some weight. We're going to just be healthier humans. So we always go out. You and I go out to dinner 3 times a week, and we always end up at the Mexican place, eating a bag of chips, drinking a margarita or two, and we're like, okay, that's not a good choice, right? So instead of going there, we have to know where to go instead. So if I said to you, instead of going there, let's go to McDonald's, like that's not the better choice, right? We assume that kids know how to fix their behavior, that they're choosing to be impulsive or they're choosing to get angry or dysregulate. The reality is they may not know the better place. So we would have to first know the better place, where I'd say, okay, we got to go to the vegetable restaurant. But then we also have to have the self-awareness because we've got a habit. So we're going to end up craving the Mexican restaurant because that's what we've always done, right? And our brain is comfortable with patterns. We don't like new things because that makes us not know how to manage whether we're safe or not. So we have to give kids the ability to have some of that self-awareness. So understanding when their bodies are dysregulating, understanding the things that make them angry or what triggers a certain behavior is really important. Then we have to have the persistence to do the change over and over again, because it's kind of like your brain's sort of like a highway. And if you think when you're born, it's like a giant grassy field. So if you're going to make these automatic neural exit ramps of like, when this happens, then I do this, you have to go over and over and over it. And it takes persistence to build an exit ramp in our brain that becomes automatic. So you have to have persistence. You also have to have energy, because it takes a lot of energy in your brain. Think about how much energy it takes when you're building a road, right? You need the machines and the gas and paving and all the people. Same kind of thing in your brain. So how do we get energy? We get energy through positivity, through dopamine. And so if you're working on something new and it's uncomfortable, I need to be able to give you like positive reinforcement every time I'm seeing you do it. What I see in schools a lot of times is we do behavior plans that count when they screw up, as opposed to counting how many times they successfully made an effort not to screw up. So we need that energy. We also need to have tenacity to forgive ourselves. You and I will end up at that Mexican restaurant because we'll be tired one day and we'll be like, ugh, let's just go there, right? And we don't have the energy to go through all the thinking and the energy it takes to be doing an unfamiliar habit. So here's the key that I see in schools though. When we're done with that meal at the Mexican place, you and I can look at each other and be like, all right, that was really good. However, we need to get back on the horse and we're going to go back to the healthier restaurant. Or we can say, Jackie, that was so much fun. And you know what? You and I were never meant to be healthy eaters. So I'll see you here again on Thursday, right? That's what most people do. And that's what most kids do. We put a behavior plan in place, but we don't attend to the self-awareness and the persistence and the energy and the positivity and the support and the tenacity that we need to help those kids make that habit automatic. So what I suggest is that we do win then plans. And the win then plan is to first of all discover, why are they acting out? What's the need behind the behavior? Or what's the trigger that's making them uncomfortable? So like when I don't know what I'm supposed to do, maybe that makes them anxious or upset. Or when I feel left out, or when when somebody says something mean to me. And then you have to give them the when replacement behavior. And then if you give them the when replacement behavior, you want to try to give something that's observable. So for example, I've used something I call a stop and think. And so I tell kids, okay, when you're sitting down, you're doing a state of action, right? You're sitting. If I stop sitting and I stand up, I've changed my state of action. If I'm quiet and then I start to talk, I've changed my state of action. So every time, and teachers can do this with the whole class to kind of train the kids up, but every time we change our state of action, we're going to go stop and think. Like make jazz hands, stop and think. And this forces your brain to activate a movement part of your brain and a language part of your brain. So it just temporarily distracts the impulse for a second, right? And it's something the teacher can see. So if you have a kid who's super impulsive or gets up or poking kids around the room, you can do this stop and think. And then when you see them do this, right away you can go over and be like, what did you just stop yourself from doing? And the kid might be like, I was going to hit that kid. And you're like, but you didn't. And you high five them, and it gives them that little dopamine hit, which gives them the energy and the reinforcement they need in order to continue to practice a new behavior.
I love that. I remember learning this at a, workers' health and safety training ages ago, just that notion of count to two, stop and think, that kind of thing. It's applicable to everything in our lives, isn't it?
Yeah,
If we do
yeah,
stop and think for one, a couple of beats, it always makes you make a better choice on everything, I think. So
yeah,
that's a really great technique. And I love did you call them jazz hands? Yep.
yeah. Whoop, whoop. Yep. Jazz hands.
Really great. And I think, again, something really catchy and something that children would like to do, as opposed to what is often, all of the behavior stuff is always or often associated with real negative things, isn't it? So I love
Well,
that.
and sometimes too, especially with the little ones, that they'll if the teacher is responding to that visual cue with positivity, like sometimes they're not even gonna be impulsive about something, but they need some attention and they'll go like this. And then the teacher will come over. And so it's like you're meeting their needs in the moment. You're also giving them the power and agency to say, I need you. I need something from you.
Yeah.
And it's okay that they can ask for that, and you're giving them an appropriate way to do that.
I love that. But also, footnote to self as a teacher in a classroom with lots of kids, make sure I'm watching out for the jazz hands.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and the other thing that I've done too, because sometimes you've got a lot of kids, it's hard to see what's going on, is that I'll have like goal partners. So if you've got two kids that are working with the jazz hands, or you can pair your kids up and you can have like, hey, if I'm busy working with students and you see your partner do this, then you need to ask them what they did and tell them that you're proud of them. And so you try to build sort of that like collective sense
Yeah,
of
I love
community,
that.
and the kids love it, and they support each other, and they get excited for each other, and they're like, what did you do, and the kids could, they get a chance to toot their own horn when they've done something that they're proud of, and it just builds kind of a classroom climate that's about growth and positivity instead of about control and compliance, and learn how to sit here, learn how to follow instructions. It changes the tone to make it more about learn how to be a better learning community member and
I love
supporting each other.
that. Yeah, civics and citizenship and care and empathy. I love it. And just generally creating a classroom of kindness, where kindness is kind of the
Right.
front foot. Yeah. Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Lisa. So just wanted to finish off if there's, I guess, I feel like we've had a lot of practical takeaways, but is there anything else that you think would be a really great tip or anything that you'd like to share with our listeners before we finish up?
Sure. There's one other thing that I've used that the little ones love is I get a can of soda or pop, I don't know what you call it there, Coke, and I shake it like crazy. And then we go outside and I open it up and it explodes everywhere. And I say to the kids, I'm like, we are just like this can. We have carbonation in us. And if you've ever had pop that's like too fizzy, it tastes gross. And if you ever have pop that's super flat, it doesn't taste good either. And so we want just right. And you're just like this too. We want you just right, just the right amount of carbonation. Sometimes you will come into the class and you're going to be carbonated. You're going to be frustrated, or you're going to be angry, or you're going to have had a really bad experience a couple minutes ago, or you're going to come in and you're just tired and you're not feeling good and you just don't want to be here. So when they come in the door as kind of a checkout procedure, they can come in and just say fizzy. And if they say fizzy, sometimes they need a hug. Sometimes they need left alone, and just give them a couple minutes and remind them, well, you know what, if you're feeling fizzy, why don't you go over to the, calming corner and take some breaths and calm your body down, and then just join us when you're ready. And then, if they're feeling flat, you can say the same kind of thing. You can have like a station that has some vagal nerve exercises and some movement exercises that can help raise them up. But again, what you're giving them is you're giving them voice, and you're saying how you feel matters and you have a right to advocate for yourself. And so if they come in and say fizzy, then either, what they want from you, if they want a hug or they want to be left alone or whatever. But what you don't do is go over and start needling them about doing something and then escalate the situation.
Yeah.
So that's another super easy kind of check in, check out. And then if you have a kid who's coming into your class fizzy 3 times a week, you might have that kind of signal, hey, we might want to have a parent meeting, or we might want to, have a meeting with the counselor to find out what's really going on here. And I worked with a school with an elementary student who, she was in the foster care system. And she was in a home that was very chaotic, very negative for her. So she was having problems all day. So we knew she was going to come to school every day fizzy. So when she came in, we had her eat breakfast in a sensory room with a swing. And she would sit and swing while she ate. And there was an aide there that would just talk to her. How you doing today? What's going on today? They had some music playing. It was calm. When we started doing that, she went from not being able to function through the morning and having multiple adults working with her like all morning to try to get her to calm down. It would last almost all the way to lunch. And then we had another intervention that we put in place to kind of calm her body back down, because when you think about like how perceptions are formed, like I was mentioning earlier with the banana, how I feel in this moment doesn't really have anything to do with this moment. It has to do with how my brain is associating this moment to all the other moments that I've had. And I think that sometimes as educators, we feel like, well, home's at home, like leave it behind. You're here now. It's not the same thing. But to your brain, it doesn't matter. Your brain's not looking in every different context as a novel.
That's amazing. And again, I love this notion that we're really empowering children to like give them really simple techniques to tell us how they're feeling and how we can best support them. I absolutely love it. And even if you had a child, I can imagine, who was non-verbal, you could also use some picture cards and things like that as well. So really inclusive of children with a disability as well. So I love it. I love it. Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that. I have really gotten so much out of this chat, Lisa, so I'm hoping our listeners will be the same. We do have some courses in the Early Years Learning Hub that relate to some of the things that we've talking about. So I'll put the links to those in there. And I'd love to put the links in our notes section as well for both of your books as well. So if you can share those with me, that would be awesome. And thank you so much for your time. We've just loved it. As I said, I'm sure this is going to be a really popular episode. So thank you again. That sounds amazing. I'll put the link to that to your LinkedIn as well in our notes. This has been another episode of the Early Years Learning Hub podcast. We hope you've enjoyed listening. Don't forget to follow us and rate us on Spotify or Apple. And yeah, check out our website. We've also got a new subscription feature as well. So thanks again, Lisa.